My name is Josh Nelson. I am a farmer in north central Iowa in Wright County near Belmont. I farm with my dad and two uncles and a cousin on a primarily grain and livestock farm. Additionally, I run cover crop seed and cattle under the brand of Cardinal Creek Farms. So I decided to enroll the farm in the Regen roadmap because I'd been toying around with the idea of cover crops for 8-ish years. Doing a lot of it myself, learning through Practical Farmers of Iowa, and some of the few people I would run into here and there in our area. There are very few farmers practicing regenerative ag in this section of the state. We don't even have an organic farm in Wright County, certified at least. There's probably people farming organically here, but nobody actually uses or has certified practices. So learning a lot of it was kind of just a ad hoc thing that I kind of pieced together by myself. I am friends with a cattle rancher in the area who went to school with Mitchell, and talking to him, he's actually enrolled in the whole thing, and I had already been thinking about it, so I just went ahead and made the plunge to basically speed up the learning process and to kind of gather all these different ideas and these threads that I've been learning from different places and tie it all into maybe one idea or approach. So the Regen roadmap has helped me implement more aggressive regen practices on the farm by getting me in touch with people and resources that understand how everything fits together, looking at that 5-year plan and having to go through the process of talking about what I've been doing, what I do now, my fertilizer program, everything else. It's something we do every year, but it's on a year-to-year basis, and we really only look 1 year out, whereas the roadmap is making me look 5 years out and think about how I want to change things from where I'm at now to some amorphous goal down the road that will probably change by the time we're at the end of those 5 years. But at least right now I've taken the time to figure out what my goal is. A year ago or 2 years ago, I would have been just like clueless, but now it's kind of opened doors to different things that I want to try on the farm, like interseeding or diverse crop rotations. And like I said, the goal is going to change at the end of the 5 years, but at least now I'm thinking about what I want to do in 5 years. Yeah, so some examples of how Continuum Ag has helped with the decision making in order to be a little bit more successful with all this has been, for example, in the diverse crop rotation realm, talking to Carolyn King about raising yellow field peas through Purus. She used to work with Purus, and she's got a lot of experience in that. We don't have any peas that are raised on a field level here in northern Iowa that I know of. And so Carolyn was able to talk me through the process of how to fit that into the crop rotation and different approaches to planting it, timing, herbicides if I want to use herbicides, and fitting that into a way that will allow me to raise a better corn crop, hopefully get a better bean crop, improve the overall bottom line of the farm. And it also kind of introduced me to different ideas of how to raise different crops. Mitchell talks a lot about interseeding or relay cropping rye and beans together, and that's kind of given me ideas of how we could do it up here. It's, every place is different. It's kind of that context issue, the principle. So you got to adapt it to your local set of circumstances, but they can give you enough information to figure out how to make those things work for yourself. So soil testing has long played a really important role in how we've done everything, but it's always on a very conventional level. We routinely get soil tests every 4 years, sampled on a 2.5 acre grid. It's taken to the lab, and then they come back and they tell us how much synthetic fertilizer we need to put on. And as Rick Haney talks about, it's all stuff that is not naturally using things that don't occur in nature. So while those soil tests are really important, were really important when you're looking at how much co-op fertilizer you're going to buy. The transition to something like the Haney test kind of gives me an idea of how much help I'm going to get from my own soil throughout the growing season, and how much I might have to supplement that, or what changes I need to make over time to get more soil biology in there. I was kind of interested going through the numbers with Carolyn and figuring out some of the farms that I've been doing Regen practices on before I knew what the term Regen was were pretty good compared to my extremely conventional fields that looked like, they stood out like a sore thumb. And so it's kind of nice to get that comparison and knowing how things work and how they fit in to the roadmap. And I'm excited to try to do some more in-season Haney testing and maybe try to do some other different things and talk to Lance Gunderson at Regen Ag Lab about what the numbers mean. So we tracked a lot of data early on throughout the harvest, but it's hard with cover crops because there's a lot of different variables. But the main thing, I guess, the main number we always talk about is the yield. If I compare the cover crop fields, especially in soybeans, to the fields that we don't have cover crops in, those no-till cover crop fields are usually among our highest yielding, even in the cold, wet soils in North Iowa. But then we also have to pay attention to what we're planting, how well it's going to survive in the winter, what the winter temperatures are like, the subsequent crop or whatever we're planting the cover crop into. So, like when I tried corn, it had a negative impact, and so then we're looking at the other ratios that you learn later on, C to N ratio, and what you're doing there. So you kind of open a Pandora's box of things, but that first number we always pay attention to is the yield. It's the cost also, because you have to make your money back. But if you improve your soil health enough, the cost kind of takes care of itself because you're getting better yields and reducing the cost of everything else. We had a lot of big challenges when we were shifting to soil health. The biggest one is that in this part of Iowa, we're still very, very, very addicted to tillage, and it's cold. The soils are cold. It takes a long time to warm things up. Our soils are tight and heavy. This is prairie pothole region, so guys here are convinced that you need to have bare ground in the fall and black ground in the spring to plant good corn. And I was kind of the same way when I first started farming, and I kind of was always interested in no-till and things, but I just didn't think it worked here. So moving away from that mentality of it doesn't work here to how can I make it work here was really hard. And then once I started to learn more about soil health and how things kind of build on themselves, a lot of the challenges more so became just logistical things of how do I do this next, and how do I reach this next goal. And that's kind of where it was nice to get hooked up with Continuum, because there's a lot of knowledge there, and I'm not doing it all by myself now. So when I go to determine how I want to, or how or what cover crops I want to plant, I'm usually looking at what the previous crop was and what I'm going into. In this area, it's pretty easy because we just alternate between corn and beans a lot of times. So going from corn to beans, it's pretty simple. It's cereal rye. You could fly it on with an airplane if you got time, or if you don't think you have time in the fall, or if you've got time, you can drill it, which we've been dabbling with. I really like drilling. It seems to really help a lot of things. But going to corn, it's a little more difficult because, again, that cold spring issue. that's where we start to think about the carbon and nitrogen ratio of the crops we're using and our goals. So we might, consider other things this coming year for 2023. I'm looking at using legumes like hairy vetch and crimson clover because I want the nitrogen, and I also don't want to get some sort of yield drag or carbon penalty from planting a heavy carbon user or heavy carbon crop like corn into cereal rye. Well, a lot of things. Like I said, I was mostly figuring this stuff out myself, so I would have loved to have any one of the Continuum Ag people up here at that time when I was trying to figure this out, or just the network of people that I gained access to over time, just talking to these folks. I've mentioned before a drill. We didn't think you could seed cover crops here with a drill, and we were convinced that you needed to aerial seed them, and that unlocks another issue that we have, which is residue. So you're planting in a big tall corn, 200 bushel corn, you got all this stuff laying around. It gets cold pretty quickly in the fall. Guys think they need to till so they can put all that residue underneath the soil and have it break down. Or when you play with no-till, you have all that stuff laying on top of the ground. So at least the drill helps break it up, size it, cut it down to where it breaks down faster. And then you also get a better seed to soil contact with that seed. So it doesn't matter how late you plant it. You could plant it much later than you would be comfortable, and you're probably going to get a pretty good stand even with the late planting. And we've learned now that we can plant into green living cover crops up here, not have any yield drag, not have any problems. And so drilling in the fall and helping learn from people like Mitchell, who showed me how to plant green, has I think progressed how we think about soil health and what we do with soil health on our farm, leaps and bounds. I think Continuum Ag has benefited the operation tremendously by helping us, first of all, get the confidence to try these things up here. Dale Strickler from Green Cover Seed always says he hears guys all the time tell him that it doesn't work here, and then he says here starts on this side and ends on this side. So for us, there's only one no-till guy in the county that I knew of prior to starting my journey, and now there's others that are dabbling with it, but I really don't care what they're doing now because I'm learning from people like Rick Clark and Brian Hora and Rob Stout and all sorts of other people that you kind of gain access through the Continuum network, but then you're also being challenged to think about your operation down the line. So it's not an annual 2022 cropping year operation. It's 5, 6, possibly even 10 years if you want to go out that far to figure out how you're going to improve things and where you want to be. So you're forced to take a long-term look at things because that's how long it takes to build soil and to work kind of in natural systems. With nutrient markets, it's no secret, the nitrogen prices, anhydrous I think is up over $1,400 a ton at this point. Urea, everything else has gone haywire too. It's working with Continuum, using that Haney test, using the recommendations, the topsoil tool, everything like that has allowed me to really hone in on the different management systems that we have, because I mentioned anhydrous, I mentioned urea, but that's not all we do. We're also using a lot of hog manure. Wright County produces a ton of hogs, literally and figuratively. So we have a lot of manure that we use, but not all of it's very good manure. Sometimes I call it manure flavored water, which is gross to think about, but it's just the nutrient value isn't there like they say it is. So when you get the Haney test or you get recommendations, you can start to figure out, how do I manage this so I'm not spending more money than I need to, or I'm not shorting the crop because I thought I had something there that isn't there. And then you're also learning about how your soil can aid aid you through what's going to come available that year, what's going to come available later on in the year, and what you have stored in your bank account through Total Nutrient Digest or whatever. And so management becomes a little bit more advanced. It's not just getting your soil test back and calling the agronomist to figure out how much you need to buy from the co-op. It's more complicated, but it's also allows you to be more flexible year to year when, so if it's too wet to apply something or fertilizer decides to go even more crazy than it is, we can find new ways of growing our own instead of having to complain about that big check we just wrote. My thoughts have changed over time, especially working with Continuum on soil biology and the microbiome, because early on I didn't really think about it that much. You thought about it in the context of there's something in the soil, it's complicated, we don't know how it's going to react with things, but we know science, we think. And so once I started doing cover crops, I understood organic matter, and I understood that there are things that you can do to influence how you farm and the results of your farm operation through yield and things like that don't involve pouring on more anhydrous or pouring on more manure or something else. And then you kind of learn over time that a lot of those more is better strategies are actually detrimental to what you're trying to do, which is raise better crops. And so, talking to Mitchell and some of the other guys at Continuum, listening to the Topsoil or the Fieldwork podcast, you kind of get addicted to the idea of soil health and caring for those little critters in the soil food web. And so now I spend all my mornings either reading books or watching YouTube about microarthropods in the soil and different strains of mycorrhizal fungi and things like that, instead of trying to figure out the complex chemistry of calcium and magnesium ratios and all that other stuff. So you start to look at things more holistically, and it makes it a little more fun to farm. Yeah, so I think Continuum, looking at crop diversity, Continuum I think could really help open the door to other markets like food grade beans or peas, or even things like wheat or other in ancient grains. They have, talking to Tucker and other people, they're working with the Regen verified label with soil Regen, and then Regen mills and all sorts of other avenues. It's kind of allowed me to think bigger than just, we don't have those markets here, because you start to build your own market similar to the way that you built your own Regen farming system. It kind of gives you confidence to try new things. And then again, all these people ahead of me, Lauren Steinlage, Russell Hedrick, and Liz and Rick Haney, and all these people, they've done this before, and they can help open doors to new markets or different buyers. And then you start, you think beyond an alternation of corn and beans to a real rotation, or even new opportunities to manage your bottom line, and actually talk about profit per acre versus margins and interest rates and operating notes. So, I'm only in my first year with Continuum, but I think it's already helped tremendously just by changing the thought process from that doesn't work here to how can I make other things work here, and learning how to have the confidence to do these things because you're learning new ways of doing things. And so, every time you learn something new, it's always like, oh, well, now I want to try I want to know how to do this next thing. And it could be some sort of Frankenstein's monster that just gets out of control, but it also could be something that takes the farm to the next level, because what we're doing now isn't working. We're 30 years, 40 years after the last farm crisis started, we're still talking about the same issues. we're still talking about the same things, and it just seems to be getting worse. So I think groups like Continuum, companies like Continuum, can really help my operation, but also others, because it tells you about how to make better community and a better farm and a better environment, and hopefully, healthier people.